Today we're going to learn about prohibition during the 1920s. We've already learned some of these vocabulary words, but I think it's important to kind of piece them together. Before prohibition took place, there was the temperance movement, and it revolved around one major issue that divided Americans in half. That was the issue of using alcoholic beverages. The temperance movement, or the campaign against alcohol use, was rooted in religious objections to drinking alcohol, and in the belief that society would benefit if alcohol were unavailable. Most of the supporters of the temperance movement were either religious groups or groups of women, who also may have been involved in the suffrage movement as well. The women pictured here are from Ohio, and they're supporters of the temperance movement. To aid in their protests, they would get together in large groups and sing hymns outside of local bars and saloons. Supporters of the temperance movement argued two different cases for why they wanted to do away with the use of alcohol. One was that alcohol caused physical harm to our bodies, especially to our liver, that it's not good for our physical health. The other argument was that it was also causing emotional harm, and that it might destroy families or relationships if people were abusing alcohol. Here's a memory trick to remember this vocabulary word. The temperance movement. Some women argued that when their husbands would return home from a bar, they would have a temper because maybe they drank too much or they were abusing alcohol. So we can say the temperance movement started from these people with a temper. The movement reached its goal in 1919 with the ratification or the approval of the 18th Amendment to our Constitution. An amendment is simply a change made to the Constitution, so this change will reflect the temperance movement. The amendment established a time period called Prohibition, and during that time there was a total ban, or you were not allowed to manufacture, sell, or transport liquor throughout the United States. So manufacture is the production of alcohol. That was illegal. It was also illegal to sell alcohol or to transport it. So let's say if it were to have been produced somewhere outside of the United States, Canada or Mexico, if you were caught transporting liquor into the United States, that also would be against the law. So that's prohibition there. During Prohibition, people would refer to the United States as being dry, because anything that is described as dry means that alcohol is not allowed.
In simplest terms, Prohibition was a ban on the manufacture, sale, and distribution of alcohol, as codified by the 18th Amendment in 1919. But it was part of a 70-year-long movement to rid the United States of the threat of demon rum.
It is befuddling the thinking of humanity.
Many people blame social problems like crime on alcohol. Groups like the American Temperance Union pushed states to pass laws banning the sale of alcohol. By 1900, these temperance groups still had not succeeded in getting the federal government to ban alcohol, so they took action in their own hands. Women like Carrie Nation would carry around axes and make raids on breweries, smashing up barrels of alcohol.
We're fighting booze. The Carrie Nation is hatchet.
By World War I, popular support grew for Prohibition based on three factors. As U.S. troops began to flood into the military, there was a great concern that the new recruits were going to be tempted by the evil of alcohol. Secondly, there was an argument that the United States needed to conserve grain that had been used in the brewing process. And third, there was an anti-German sentiment against the beer manufacturers. By 1919, the forces behind the Prohibition movement secured the ratification of the 18th Amendment banning the sale of alcohol.
Strong men are weeping, and dry throats cry out in anguish.
Now, the Prohibition activists had hoped that banning the sale of alcohol would decrease crime, but in many cases it actually had the opposite effect. There still was a huge demand for alcohol, and mafia operations created multi-million-dollar business enterprises bringing in alcohol illegally into the United States to supply illegal bars and speakeasies. Ultimately, it was the Great Depression that did in Prohibition. People began to argue that we could help out the farmers by allowing them to sell their grains for the purpose of making alcohol. Also, the federal government realized they could get lots of tax revenue by taxing alcohol. And so, in 1933, the federal government ratified the 21st Amendment, allowing the sale and distribution of alcohol. For better or for worse, Americans could once again take a drink.
Unfortunately, most of the video clips that I find on this topic cover it from start to finish, so you got a bit of a sneak preview about what we'll be studying ahead. Let's talk about life during Prohibition. So during Prohibition, in areas in the rural South and Midwest, and if we remember our vocabulary word, rural is a country-like setting. The temperance movement was pretty strong. Prohibition generally succeeded out in the country and in farm-like areas. But in the cities, however, Prohibition had very little support. This picture here displays a scene that would be very common as soon as the 18th Amendment had been ratified. You would see the police officers looking on as saloon owners would be pouring out any alcohol that they had in stock. They'd actually pour it right into the sewer. So this is an average scene in 1919. Almost immediately, the nation is divided into two separate camps. We have the dries, people who support Prohibition, and then we have the wets, people who oppose Prohibition and who did not like it. So we've got the nation pretty much divided in half. Even though supporters of the temperance movement believed that doing away with alcohol would solve the issue of crime throughout the country, it actually did almost quite the opposite. There was this continuing demand for alcohol, which led to widespread law-breaking. Illegal bars and clubs known as speakeasies sprang up in cities all over the country. So here is a picture of a typical speakeasy seen in Life magazine. This would also be considered a speakeasy. Obviously, if it's a illegal bar or club, then there were not many windows. It was a dark, almost like a secret place. We do have a memory trick for remembering what a speakeasy is. The term actually comes from the idea that a patron or a customer at one of these bars should speak quietly when ordering a drink. That way, any nearby police officers would not overhear what was going on. They would not overhear any of the law-breaking taking place in a speakeasy. With only about 1,500 agents, the government really could do little to enforce Prohibition. They had a hard time enforcing the laws. This picture here is what it would look like when the government would enforce the laws. This is a group of Chicago policemen raiding a local speakeasy. To learn more about life during the 1920s and the end of Prohibition, be sure to click on the second video available labeled The End of Prohibition.